Welcome to the webinar. First of all, I wanted to kind of make a couple of points today as we get started. This particular webinar is not just for people at large law firms trying to transition back into smaller law firms. It's actually for anyone that may be at any type of law firm that's looking to transition into a role that may not necessarily be as important, could be as important of a law firm, meaning it is significant of a law firm, or also to a position where you're sort of underemployed as an attorney. So what does that mean? It means that you would be, employed perhaps in-house, or employed as a contract attorney, or employed in a government role that's not as significant as where you're at, or maybe not in a law firm, or maybe employed in a smaller market as opposed to a large market. This particular topic is extremely important right now because this is among the worst legal markets that I have seen in 25 years in this business. Typically, every week we get like 25 plus interviews, and in weekly now it's been far reduced, meaning by maybe 3 interviews or 5 interviews. So this has never happened in the entire history of our company. It's been similar to this before, but it's never been this bad. When it's this bad, typically what happens is a lot of people exit the legal recruiting business, and only the ones that are strong, like ourselves, are able to stick around. So this is a very significant market. A lot of bad things are happening to people. And I know a real estate agent here. I live in Malibu, California, and he's among the most successful real estate agents in the country. His name's Chris Cortazzo. And he told me that typically he has about 25 homes in escrow at all times. And it's been like that for years. And now he's down to like 1 or 2. So not only is the employment market slow, but the real estate market's slow. I'm sure you're probably seeing that wherever you are. And people are conserving cash. There's a lot of people that are pulling money from the sidelines out of the stock market because they're worried about it. Like Warren Buffett has most of his money in cash right now. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the market that concerns you. And because it concerns you, you may be looking at different types of firms. I'm also seeing from large law firms more laid off attorneys than I've ever seen in my career. Typically, we get maybe 20 plus attorneys applying to BCG from large law firms is among the hundreds of people that are applying each day. And I'm seeing a lot of those people, the majority of them have been laid off from their firms. Now, it's not in all practice areas. It tends to be focused on corporate, mainly in real estate, but this is not a good market by any stretch of the imagination. So what I'm talking about to you today is not just going to work in a smaller law firm. It's about being able to transition in this market and make decisions that are going to benefit you in the long run. Now, this is a live webinar because this topic is so important. I hope that everyone will ask a lot of questions at the end. This is a really good opportunity to kind of learn about what sort of decisions you should be making, how you can get positions, and then how you can position yourself to either get back to work in a law firm, or if you're trying to work in a smaller law firm, do whatever you can to position yourself to not have to be there forever. I'll talk to you about a lot of the arguments for working in a smaller law firm. But at this stage, I just want you to understand how these decisions are going to affect your career. I'll talk to you about some job search methods so you don't necessarily have to be underemployed in your career. And we're going to cover a lot of ground today. And the main thing I want you to get out of this is I want you to understand how the decisions you make can affect your career. I also want you to understand how you can position yourself if you're going to be unemployed, meaning I don't know what it is. It could be from a large law firm to a small law firm. It could be from a law firm to another practice setting. It could be moving to a very small market. I mean, there's all these different things that could happen to you in a bad market. And if you are a law student, I'm sure you're seeing what a bad market is. If you are in a large law firm, I'm sure you're seeing what the market's like right now, and it's probably scary. And partners, associates, everyone right now is under a lot of pain. And so you should know that you're not alone, and also that I'm with you and I support you. I've been through several of these slower markets in my career. And again, like I said, this is the slowest I've ever seen it. There's been times like in 2008 and 9 where the market kind of fell off the cliff for a little bit, but it wasn't this bad. And it also recovered much more quickly than things are happening right now. So as you're entering this market, or as you're trying to survive in this market, it's important that you understand the decisions you can make and how those are going to either help you or not help you. So if you leave a large law firm, it could be any type of law firm. For a smaller one, you certainly can transition back to a large law firm, and it does work. You can do it, but there are lots of things that are kind of going against you when you're trying to do it. And a lot of times, attorneys, especially in large markets, think that they can go to work for a smaller law firm and then transition back. So it's very common for people in big markets to take jobs in smaller to mid-sized firms during market slowdowns, or just make that decision because they want to work in a boutique type firm. And then they believe that they can still get back to a larger firm. So I'll give you some of the reasons to kind of support working in a smaller law firm. Why you may want to do this. And then I'll tell you why, if you do want to transition back, those types of reasons typically aren't accepted if you want to transition back. So this is a very loaded issue. It doesn't mean transitioning from a large law firm to a small law firm. It can mean transitioning from a mid-sized law firm to a smaller law firm. But it can also mean transitioning back from another practice setting to a law firm, really no matter what the size of the law firm. So people, when the market's slow, often make decisions to go into other practice settings, house, public interest, or sometimes they even start their own businesses in unrelated fields, or they may decide to become solo practitioners and then believe at some point they can transition back. And you need to understand, one of the things that I try to teach is, I've been doing this for so long that I see patterns and I see what happens to people that make different decisions, because I try to market them and I see how firms respond to that market. And the large law firms, for one, are very, very difficult to get back into once you've left for a different type of firm. And then I'll also discuss the reasons and conditions under which you can transition back from a small law firm to a large law firm. It certainly is possible if you make the right decisions. I've placed lots of people that have tried to do that. There are conditions, market conditions, where that's possible. Or if you're working for a certain type of law firm, it's possible, but it does become very helpful. And this applies to people that want to transition from a large law firm to a smaller law firm. But as I told you, it applies to a lot of different types of people. Now, what's important about your career decisions is why you make certain career decisions, like why you may be interested in going to work for a different law firm, a large law firm to a small law firm, or in some sort of different practice setting. You can make that decision to go and do a different practice setting when you're a law student and can't get jobs. You can make the decision to go into a different setting when you're a junior attorney or mid-level attorney, a partner. You can make these at all sorts of different times in your career. And many times people go to very small law firms from large law firms because this is the only place they can find a job. And other times they do that because they just spend so much time trying to find a job, they can't. So when the market's not very good, large law firms often will not hire people will be letting people go. And the only way you can often get a job is to use your credentials to get a position in a smaller law firm. Now, I am going to tell you at the outset that if you are a large law firm attorney and you're trying to find a job, there are a lot of things you need to be aware of. The first thing is that it's not a bad idea to try to find a job in a smaller law firm. Your goal as an attorney at any point in your career, and you should really write this down, and this is an important point to note. It's one of the most important points you will ever note for your career, and that you should write down. What you need to write down is that your goal, whether it's a law student or a practicing attorney, is to always have access to work. Meaning you need to be in a position where someone's giving you work. Whether you're a solo practitioner and someone's giving you work, whether you're an associate and someone's giving you work, whether you're a partner and someone's giving you work, both inside and outside the firm, but your goal is to always be in a position where people are giving you work. Because if you stop working, then your career is pretty much over. I mean, you cannot stop generally for any length of time. If you get laid off, you need to try to find a job in a very short period of time. Many times, attorneys are much safer in smaller law firms than large law firms. I can't tell you how many people that I've seen, and it's in the hundreds of people that I know or I've worked with, that have lost their jobs with big firms and often are never employable, never get jobs with law firms again, or are too stubborn and only want to work in large law firms and their careers end. Large law firms, by the way, are very dangerous. They're dangerous because they're paying you so much money and you have to be giving them quite a bit of revenue through your hours to support your salary. So anytime you put yourself in a position where you're getting a salary that is very, very high and there may not be enough work for you, then you find yourself in a position where you're just not getting any work and you're let go. And when you're let go and you start trying to find a job, it becomes very, very difficult. So if you are in a position where you're worried about your career, worried about staying employed, then you need to really take a lot of very direct actions that I'll cover towards the end of this webinar and also in the Q&A to make sure that you consistently do not have employment gaps on your resume, meaning right now, you need to find some place that will hire you. And that may be a smaller law firm. And so if that's the case, that's what you need to do. You need to stay employed and you need to have work coming in. And what does work coming in mean? I'm trying to have you take notes on this, but work just coming in means that someone's giving you things to do and a salary. It's as simple as that. And if you want to work in law firms, then that typically needs to be a law firm, whether it's a small law firm or a mid-sized law firm or a law firm in a smaller market. It needs to be a law firm that's going to continue to keep you employed, because once you get out of a law firm, it becomes very, very difficult to get back. So I really do stress to people to try to work in law firms and not go in other practice settings, even if it means working in a smaller law firm. It's just very, very important. Once you go into another practice setting, which means going to work for the government or going to work in-house or any other practice setting, going into academia, your life with a law firm is technically not always over. And I really do promote, this is my job. I do nothing but law firm placements. I really do encourage you to do whatever you can to either work in a law firm or to stay employed in a law firm, because you can practice law in a law firm from the time you're 25 until the time you're 85. You cannot practice in-house from the time you're 25 until you're 85. Most in-house jobs last a few years because different management stuff comes in. And there's just a lot of drawbacks to other practice settings. It's also very difficult for you, if you can't get work, to go to work for companies like Axiom that will farm you out to companies, or to go to work for as a contract attorney, which a lot of people do. So you really need to worry about getting a position in a law firm of some kind when you do not have, when things are slower, when you've lost your job very, very fast. And it's just so sad to me, because in general, not always, but in general, it's the people that come from big firms that lose their jobs that don't apply to small law firms, which is the majority of them, but often never get a position again in a law firm. So if you are out of work and need a position, I'm going to tell you how to get a position with a law firm that will hire you right away. In economic recessions, which in the law firm market, we're 100% in it right now. There's just not even any doubt. I have absolutely no doubt, especially at the larger law firms. In these economic slowdowns, you often have no other alternative to stay employed in a law firm. And so it's a smart thing to do. I've told this story before, but we had during the 2008-2009 recession, we had two offices that were completely different. We had one office, it was in Chicago, that was going through this slowdown and no one was hiring. And we had another office in New York City where there was the slowdown and no one was hiring. And the recruiters that I had in New York were very myopic. And they said, we only make placements in large law firms. We only make them in New York City. They were very adamant about that. And they kept following that business model. And I went out to visit them. I remember after this recession, we were going out for like 6 or 7 months, and they had no money. They hadn't made placements. They weren't doing well. And then I had an office in Chicago, which when people that worked for me in New York were very confident in themselves and very confident and very ego-centered, meaning they believed that they should be making placements at only large law firms, and that had something to do with their identity, whereas the recruiters in Chicago were a little bit different. And I told them, you need to go and look at smaller markets outside of New York outside of Chicago with your candidates, meaning You need to send them to smaller law firms in the suburbs. You need to send them to smaller markets in the Midwest. And they did that, and the recruiters in New York had their worst year ever, meaning hardly anything happened, if at all. And the recruiters in Chicago actually had their best year ever. So I'm telling you that there's a lot of opportunities in smaller markets and smaller law firms, slowdowns. So you need to understand why that may be a good idea for you. And even if you're in like a mid-sized market, expanding your search to firms in smaller markets or just expanding your search to smaller firms in your existing markets. So I want to talk a little bit about the arguments that people make, like why they say they want to go to work at small law firms. I will talk about kind of the reality of that, and then I'll talk a little bit about what it really means. If you can only get a job in a small law firm and you're coming from like a major law firm, you need to be aware that that decision is going to make it very, very difficult for you to return to a large law firm in the future. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I'll just kind of give you a couple. So if you are a large law firm hiring people and you had candidates and say you go into a smaller law firm today and then you want to go back to a larger law firm in 2 years, well, if you were a law firm in a large law firm, who would you prefer to hire? Would you prefer to hire an attorney that's coming from an existing large law firm and has the training and everything that the law firm understands and the quality of work, or would you want to hire someone from a smaller law firm? So when you're at a smaller law firm, you're going to be competing with people from larger law firms from the same jobs, and it's just going to make it very difficult for you. Large law firms typically will hire from brand names they trust, and where you're going to be working with attorneys that have similar credentials as you, and larger clients that are going to expect a certain standard of work, and attorneys that are competitive with each other in large law firms, and where it's more difficult to stay employed if you're not doing good work. And so large law firms will prefer to hire someone with that experience. So anytime you make the experience, you make the choice to go from a small law firm to a large law firm to a small law firm, you need to realize how difficult it's going to be to get back. The same thing goes with, working in a smaller market there, that it's just going to make it look like this is the only place you could get a job. And if you could only get a job there, then maybe you weren't able to sell yourself as well, or maybe there was something a little off about your background. It doesn't matter, but it makes it more difficult. Large law firms will also wonder, why would you be willing to take a position that may pay half of what a large law firm does, as opposed to working in a large law firm because you're desperate? Why would that be? And so that kind of hurts you as well. And anyway, law firms will feel much differently about you if you just choose to go to a smaller law firm. And that also applies to going to a different practice setting as well. So you just always need to keep that in mind. Sometimes people go into smaller law firms because they want to see if it's the environment they prefer. And there are a lot of good things about smaller law firms. There can be better quality of life. There can be the ability to get clients. There can be the ability to have more responsibility on matters. So there's all sorts of reasons that people may go into small law firms. They may do so when they get senior and it becomes difficult to stay employed in a large law firm. They want to make sure that they're continually getting work, or they want to make sure that they're in a position where they're able to work on sophisticated matters for the smaller law firm and have a lot of responsibility with it, or where they have the ability to generate clients because the billing rates are lower at the small law firm. So this is a decision that people make all the time, but they don't always understand this decision and how it can permanently affect your career. I really recommend, if you're serious about your career, you should spend a lot of time rewatching webinars and things that we have on BCG and reading articles, because there are so many little things, and this is not a little thing, that can permanently affect your ability to go to a large law firm or to go back to a large law firm. Now, I'm going to also tell you today, which is important, what you can do to move from a small law firm to a large law firm. If you're currently at a small law firm, what you can do and how you can position yourself to do that. But there's just a lot of stuff going on here that I'd like to cover. So when you take a position in a smaller law firm, people are always under the impression that it's going to mean less stress. It's going to be easier, that the work environment is going to be easier, and many times that's the fact. But there's still going to be a lot of the same stuff, which is deadlines, there's still stress. And so, the only real difference between the large law firm and the small law firm many times is that the clients are going to be, at a small law firm, are going to be, more price sensitive. So what does that mean? That means if you're a large law firm and you want to sit back and bill 40 hours on some matter to a large client, that client is likely to just pay the bill. But if you do that with a smaller client, they're not as likely to pay the bill. Because they're not as likely to pay the bill, you can't do as good of work for those small clients as you would do for large clients. So that means that the standard of work is lower. Like the standard of work that the law is required of the small firm is much lower. I've noticed I had a law firm, I don't anymore, but I had a law firm of maybe 7 attorneys in Malibu, California for about 10 or 12 years. I had that law firm while I was running BCG, not because I wanted to run a law firm, but because we had offices all over the country and lots of employees and lots of corporate filings and things to make. And so we needed to rely on instead of giving the work to law firms, we needed to give it to, we did it ourselves to save money. So instead of it costing $300 or $400 an hour per attorney, effectively probably cost me $75 or something. But the work we did was for ourselves with a smaller client. And so I couldn't have people working on things in as much detail. So when you work for smaller clients, you may go to a firm. I had the situation happen yesterday. I had a candidate that wanted to go to work for another law firm in another city that was smaller than the one that she was currently, that was going to expect 1,850 hours from her. It was a pretty good job. I mean, she was a trust and estates attorney. The firm offered her, she was 1 or 2 years out, $180,000, but if she made those 1,850 hours, but she realized that she would be very difficult for her to make. So it's often much more difficult in smaller law firms to make your hours. The other thing that I noticed when I was hiring attorneys for my own firm, I would hire people because I couldn't afford to pay what large law firms paid. I mean, I paid what I could afford to pay for a 7-person law firm. The people that I hired came in with all of these horrible habits. Like they wouldn't be able to even work through matters in a lot of detail, or even be able to understand the level of detail it requires to get the right side of get on the good side of a transaction, or to win litigation. And when attorneys from smaller law firms come up against attorneys from larger law firms, the reason that the people from smaller law firms most often lose is because, first of all, they can't put in as much time, and they're not taught to put in as much time. So the work isn't as good. Because the work's not as good, they lose. And it's kind of how it works. I mean, large law firms are notorious for winning most litigation cases and getting on the best side of transactions when they're up against other attorneys. And it's not because the other attorneys aren't as good or couldn't be as good. It's because their clients won't give them the money to do that. So they have to push things out quickly out the door and so forth. So when you go to a smaller law firm, you may often also find yourself doing work that is beneath you, meaning it's work that secretaries did, or paralegals and receptionists at smaller law firms. I had a thing even this morning. I had to file a motion in a case that I'm representing myself personally. It's a stupid small issue, but I had to file a motion this morning, and I'm not filing it today. I'm filing it tomorrow, but I wasn't even sure, like, how do I file with the court? Do I need to use a server? What do I do? And because all the law firms that I've ever worked at, all that stuff was done for me. So when you go from a large law firm to a smaller law firm, you'll find yourself without anyone helping you. It can be very discouraging. Another thing to keep in mind is attorneys from large law firms kind of consider themselves part of a club. They're very proud of the firm they're at. They're often very proud that they're part of a community of people at these large law firms. They're very aware of their salary compared to attorneys in other large law firms, and they're paid a lot of money. And that's kind of part of a club. And this club applies to people that are in large law firms. It doesn't apply to people that are not in large law firms. I had a candidate recently. He was a trademark attorney, Fenwick and West, or Wilson Sonsini, I don't remember what it was. And then I had another trademark attorney that was at a very good firm. They'd gone to Ivy League law school, but the firm was very small. And attorney from the large law firm, I sent them out to firms, and they got several interviews. I mean, and then the firms were calling, like begging, like we really want to see this person. And the other attorney that arguably was just as good as the other attorney didn't get any interviews. So with large law firms, so it's much easier to transition from a large law firm to a small law firm. And the work in a small law firm often gets to the point where people don't want to work there. The atmosphere is very competitive. And so in order to succeed there, you don't have any doubt as to what you want to do. I get people emailing me their resume fairly consistently that say they want to be recruiters in our company. And they're typically people that are just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to practice law. And they don't even consider that they can go to work to a smaller law firm that may be less competitive. They're just like, I want to practice law. And if you look at the bios that are common on a lot of their websites, you'll see that there are all these people that their bios are, they went to these great schools and worked at these great firms, but obviously they stopped doing that. And because they stopped doing that, they're no longer practicing law. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a recruiter, because obviously a recruiting firm. But at the same time, you don't always see attorneys coming in from smaller law firms saying that they want to completely get out of the practice of law. I'm going to make another point that is a little bit not nice, I guess would be a good way to put it. But like the work we do at BCG is working with candidates it's very detail oriented. You have to research firms, you have to look at all sorts of research, you have to be very confident in yourself, you have to be trained in a certain way and have a certain attention to detail. And attorneys I often hire from smaller law firms aren't able to effectively make that transition here. So even if they do decide that, they don't do well. In contrast, when we hire attorneys from large law firms, they almost always succeed. Maybe because they have the confidence, maybe they succeed because they're able to look at things more deeply. But there are definitely you often develop better skills in larger law firms. And I'm not saying that to be rude, but I am saying that if you set working in a larger law firm as a career goal, it can be, at least early in your career, it can be a good thing. And when a large law firm looks at your resume, they're looking for, does this person really want to work in a large law firm? And if you have anything on your resume that shows doubt, meaning you've gone in-house, you've taken some sort of other government position, then law firms are going to pick up on that. And they're going to say that this person probably won't stick around because they've already made the decision to do something in a smaller law firm or different practice setting. So if you look like you're going to leave that law firm to do something else again that's less stressful, then that law firm, other law firms aren't likely to hire you. It's just how it is. It's large law firms will almost always hire people from other large law firms. One good reason to go to work at a smaller law firm, and this is something that I personally support, and I believe that you should keep in mind when you're trying to go to work for a smaller law firm, is getting the opportunity to develop business. And there are lots of ways that a smaller law firm can be beneficial to be able to generate business compared to a larger law firm. Larger law firms will require you often to bring in giant institutional clients, meaning Tesla or Apple or companies like that, if they're going to take those clients. Where if you're trying to bring in smaller clients to large law firms, they're just not even going to be interested. I had a guy that I really respect a great deal. He ended up moving from a small law firm to a bigger law firm to an even bigger law firm, and then ultimately now is a partner at arguably one of the top 2 or 3 law firms that concentrates on litigation in the United States, if not the world. Cases all over because they don't have offices, and just a really great firm. It's not Quinn Emanuel. It's what I would argue is a firm that has even more prestige as a litigation firm. And I'm not going to say who this person is way, but that person made all these moves, and then I got to know them fairly well. Was coaching them for a while, and so I had a litigation case that I wanted him to help me with, and his firm was basically like, this guy this case has to generate at least $500,000 in the early months in order for us to get involved. So this is what large law firms expect. And so they're looking for major business and someone as me as a client for the work, even though I'm not a huge client, but they're looking for a lot of money. And it's often not very difficult for someone like myself to write a $500,000 check to a law firm in order to be represented. So, but to develop business, it's much easier in a small law firm, but you often will have more time to go out and meet people. You'll be able to get clients that you wouldn't be able to in a larger law firm, and have a lot more opportunity. So, for example, if you're a corporate attorney, you can start going out and meeting with smaller businesses, and doing work for them. I mean, smaller businesses might be 50 or a company, but you can start meeting with them, develop relationships, and start getting work from them where you might not be able to in a larger law firm. You can do the same thing with litigation matters. You can do it with intellectual property matters and all sorts of different matters, but it's much easier most of the time to do that in a smaller law firm. Another thing I was talking to candidate of mine about the other day. She was a great candidate, and she's currently working for a immigration firm with maybe 10 attorneys in it. And she was today, actually, she has an interview with a person who's a solo practitioner, a very good solo practitioner who went to Columbia Law School and worked at a big firm, that worked for a huge firm and that decided to become a immigration attorney. But I said to her that this is actually a very good opportunity for you because you're going to be working directly with this one attorney, and this one attorney you're going to be able to watch how she gets business and how she brings things in, and that can help you for your whole career. If you want to start a firm, it can help you. If you want to start generating business while you're with her, it can help you. So I've seen lots of attorneys that have transitioned from large law firms to smaller ones and been able to get business and all sorts of stuff. I've actually seen it's very, very common for attorneys that join smaller law firms after they graduate to slowly develop a book of business. And by the time they're at their 7th or 8th year, because of all that business, they're making just as much as attorneys at law firms. And not only that, but they have the employment stability. I mean, the book of business that they can keep building on and use for the rest of their careers. Whereas someone in a large law firm gets to a point of working in these large law firms forever where they don't have any business and therefore they're not employable. And that's something I want you to really think about. Like, what is going to benefit you the most in the long run? So if you are not in a large law firm right now, I will tell you that you may be in a much better position than an attorney that if you're a first year in a small law firm or a 5th year in a small law firm, you've never worked for a large law firm, you may actually be in a better position than an attorney at a large law firm making $400,000 a year and 150 or 200. You may actually be in a much better position because you are in a position where you can generate business, and as you become more and more senior, you have that business which you can take to another law firm. You can start your own firm with. You may be actually, or you're getting a percentage of and making a lot of money. You may actually be in a better position than an attorney in a large law firm. It can actually be a very good career, even for law students. I mean, you might be in a better position because what happens to the substantial percentage of attorneys that join large law firms is obviously, that most of them don't make partner, but they get to the point in their career where they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years out, and that large law firm, unless they're going to be partner, which you can be, of course, if you're very, very dedicated and good and you learn how to do it, but they get to the position where they're not able to make partner and they don't have any business, and kind of their only option is to go in-house many times. And so their careers do not have the same stability as attorneys from small law firms. So if you are in a small law firm right now and you're feeling badly about yourself, I'm telling you that this actually could be a good thing. So there are a lot of things to consider if you want to go back from a small law firm to a large law firm. The clients you develop in a small law firm are typically not going to be the same types of clients that large law firms are interested in. Large law firms are going to be interested in clients that pay very high hourly rates. The law firm can bill lots and lots of money to, and the clients largely are not going to be price sensitive. So if you go to a small law firm and develop that kind of business, it's not going to necessarily help you as much as you think it would, because large law firms are not going to be interested in. Now, there are lots of cases of people that start out in large law firms, small law firms, move to bigger law firms, and along the way continue developing bigger and bigger clients and end up in a position where they can work in a large law firm. I saw a woman in Chicago, that a recruiter of ours in Chicago had been working with her for, I don't know, at least 15 years. And when she first started working with her, she was at a small law firm, and she kept saying, "I want to work at Watkins. I really want to work at Latham & Watkins." That was her dream, as to one day end up at Latham & Watkins. And so over these 15 years, she kept moving to larger and larger law firms and getting larger and larger clients, where she got to the point where she was at, I would say, like a kind of lower ranked AmLaw 200 law firm, a national firm, but not one of the best. And she had, like, I don't know, $10 million book of business, which is very, very good. Or maybe it was like 7 or 8, I don't know. But eventually Latham & Watkins talked to her, and they said, why don't we talk in a few years when you get this book of business up by like $5 million or something. So, and I don't know what happened to her, because the recruiter that was working with her ultimately left our firm. But my point is that it is possible to move from a smaller law firm to larger law firms if you are able to bring in larger and larger clients. But if you are trying to get clients at a smaller law firm, it's also very important to understand that those clients are rarely going to be able to pay high fees. And not only that, but they're going to want the brand name of the firm. It's just, that's what's important to them. I go to business groups and meetings, and these businessmen from large companies and things are always bragging about the firms that they have in their brand names, and that's important to them. So they don't use smaller law firms because they want a brand behind them. So in companies that have general counsels that often come from large law firms, believe that many smaller law firms don't have as good of resources, they don't have attorneys that are as good. And so the large law firm will often not want to use a smaller law firm because of the brand and the perception that they may not be as good of an attorneys. It's just kind of how it works. And that's not to say anything negative about working with a smaller law firm. It's just to tell you that you're going to be in a position where it's going to be more difficult for you to bring in large clients. And just as kind of a career digression here for a moment, like, what are the benefits of large clients? Well, the benefits of large clients are that they're paying, and they can afford to pay, massive legal bills. And because they're paying these massive legal bills, obviously, if you're the attorney that brings in that work, you're going to be making a lot more money than you would at a smaller law firm. So it's not uncommon these days for attorneys in large law firms to make over $10 million a year. Making that much money in a small law firm is almost impossible unless you're doing plaintiff's personal injury or something like that. It's just very, very difficult. Many times people move to smaller law firms because they want to get experience in a different practice area. So almost every webinar, we may have the same question today. People ask, I want to switch practice areas. It's very common, for example. So right now what's happening is attorneys that are doing corporate want to switch into litigation because there's more work in litigation typically in recessions and so forth. It just keeps going. There's more work in litigation now. So people often want to switch practice areas. In order to do that, you typically will need to go to a smaller law firm. The same thing happens when the economy is very good. You get attorneys that are practicing litigation wanting to go in corporate because they're doing so. But large law firms will not typically hire anyone that wants to switch practice areas. Why would they? I mean, if you were a large law firm and you were deciding that, and you had an opening for a corporate attorney, and you had 25 good applications, why would you want to hire someone that's not even doing that practice? It'd be crazy. So it's very, very difficult to switch to another practice area in a large law firm. And typically those types of attorneys are also viewed as high risk, because when an attorney wants to switch practice areas, they may be doing it for economic reasons, like trying to go to litigation from corporate or corporate to litigation. They may be doing it for economic reasons, but at the same time, attorneys that are kind of interested in switching practice areas often will start that new practice area because they want to go into that new practice area because they say there's all these things they don't like about their current practice area, but many times they're just kind of perceived as high risk because their problem is often not their practice area. It's just the practice of law, or more specifically, working in a law firm. They don't like the law firm. They don't like working in a law firm, but they think maybe if I'm in a different practice area, I'll be happy. And that almost always is not the case. But if you really do want to work in a practice area, one of the easiest ways to do it is to try to go to work in a smaller law firm. And so, say you are working in a major law firm and you went to Michigan Law School and got a job there, and you decide all of a sudden you're doing regular litigation and you want to do, I don't know, an example, environmental law. Well, those large law firms are going to be hiring people to do environmental law from other large law firms doing environmental law. But a smaller law firm may take a chance on you because your qualifications are so awesome. They don't have anybody from a large worked in a large law firm there. They don't have anyone who went to schools like you did. So they may take a chance on you. It's very, very, that's really the best way to switch practice areas. But if you do get that experience in a practice area, you practice area in a smaller law firm, you need to understand that the type of experience you get and the quality of experience you get and the types of clients you work on are not going to be at the same level that you would be doing in a larger law firm. Now, I've made this point several times in this webinar today, like saying that large law firms do work in a different manner than smaller law firms. And typically what that means is that you will not go into as much detail on matters. You will not be expected to perform at the same level. You will miss arguments, issues and transactions, and all sorts of things, often not because you're not a great attorney, but because the clients can't afford to pay for that level of work. Or if you're trained at a smaller law firm, you may never learn how to look at matters in a lot of detail. I had a very interesting thing happen to me with my law firm. I had an ad out for an attorney, and I got this application from this guy that had gone to a top 10 law school and had gotten this award for being one of the top 5 students in his graduating class. I mean, this guy was off the chart smart. I mean, he's the kind of guy that the LSATs and aced it and LSATs, SATs and aced it, meaning perfect scores and things. This very, very smart guy, but he had never wanted to go to work in a large law firm. And so he had basically, when he graduated, become a solo practitioner. And so 2 or 3 years in we're doing that, he decided, well, I would prefer to get a steady paycheck. Harrison's offering this job. I live fairly close by, like 20 minutes away from the office. So I'm going to apply for this job. And he was with me for 2 weeks to start. And the work that he was turning in was of such low quality, I couldn't believe it. I was astonished, meaning he was missing things. He was using forms like you can use, like there's all these, just an example of a form, a California form for using forms to making his arguments for a motion in forms as opposed to attaching like memo points and authorities with case law. I mean, just all these things I couldn't believe. And so after 2 weeks of this, he was like, I can't handle this. This is the way I want to practice law. Like, but why would I do this? The reason was everything he'd done up until that point, he was self-taught and he just knew how he could cut corners to get things done. And so that's just kind of how it works. So in terms of, and that's what he was trained. So he worked for me for 2 weeks and then he quit because he just was so like upset about having all this stuff pointed out. And I was like, okay, whatever. Well, actually, I wasn't okay, whatever. I was actually a bit upset about it. And so if you change your mind, let me know. And then I was in India visiting an office that I have there, and he came back and he was smart enough. He said, what, I actually really appreciate your teaching me this way. It's amazing, and I appreciate it. And I didn't practice law for many years. I mean, I just practiced with work for a federal judge for a year, and then worked for large law firms for less than 3 years. And he said, I appreciate it. And he came back, and then he worked for me for a couple of years, and then he set up his own law firm and became very successful. I mean, to the point where when I called him on the phone, like I had to go through, like, who are you? What is this about? Like, really go through a lot of hurdles to get for him. And he said that, I couldn't have done this unless I learned how to look at things in more detail. So I'm just telling you, when you are working for smaller law firms, you don't always learn that level of detail to do things. And I'm not saying that I'm like some awesome attorney, because I don't have enough experience to really call myself that, but I did learn some basic things about detail. And that's what you learn in the large law firms, how to do things as well as they possibly be done. So there are also some very good smaller law firms, but if a law firm is going to hire you to transition into another practice area, they're typically not going to be the best firm. You're not always going to get the best experience. And so it's transitioning back can often be very difficult. Large law firms, I'm just kind of sending some things out for you to understand. They value stability, typically stability and commitment to one practice area. And if the law firms see you lack that stability, they're often going to be a little bit turned off. So, for example, if you start your career working for 3 years as a litigator, then all of a sudden in corporate, they're going to be like, what the hell? They would more rather be interested in hiring someone that has done, so example, you do litigation for 2 years or 3 years, and you switch into corporate, you do that for 2 years, and then at the 5-year mark, you're looking for a position in a large law firm after going to a small law firm. But the law firm can choose from plenty of people that have 5 years of experience, not only in that practice area in a large law firm. So if you were the law firm, you obviously would probably want to hire that person as opposed to someone else. So that's just kind of how that works. And the other issues are your class year and so forth. And there's just a lot of things different. Another point I'd like to make is, many times people will go into smaller law firms to get more hands-on experience, meaning if you go to a smaller law firm, you may suddenly be willing to be able to do trials. You may be able to take direct client contact and responsibility for entire things. And that actually can be very rewarding, meaning you may not want to have to sit a second chair in a case to a senior partner for 20 years. You may want the experience to go right away to court, to have significant do transactions on your own. And this can be much more fulfilling to an attorney than working in a large law firm. And it does matter. I mean, smaller law firms will often give you a lot more hands-on experience, a lot more responsibility. And that can be a good thing. But at the same time, you may be doing more administrative work. But if you are taking that responsibility in different matters, there's also an opportunity that stuff can go wrong. So what does that mean? That means when you're in a large law firm, what's happening is you may be an associate, there may be another associate above you, and then there may be one partner looking at things and another partner. So it's very difficult for stuff to go wrong, much more difficult than it would be in a smaller law firm where things could happen that, where you're not doing the best, where you're not getting the same level of exposure to, large, you're not getting as many people looking over your work. And that actually can be beneficial because you may do something, you may miss a point, you may make a point that's not supportable. And so large law firms will often help you to not make mistakes and make the ultimate work product much better. And I've seen a couple, I can just think of a couple of, several instances where I've seen attorneys go to smaller law firms from larger law firms. I had one candidate I worked with early in my career, and it was very sad. He'd gone to Harvard Law School and done really well there. He was having a difficult time fitting into the large law firm he was in. And I don't like to say this was 20 plus years ago, but he was very kind of flamboyant and didn't quite fit in with the kind of fraternity-like culture of the firm he was at. So he went because he was kind of running away from how he was treated there, which was not good. He took a job with a smaller law firm, a very well-respected one, and started off there. And all of a sudden, they were sending him to court all the time. He was going to take the lead in the trial, and he didn't do well in front of judges and so forth. He just couldn't think on his feet, and the law firm ended up letting him go. And he ended up starting his own firm. I got in touch with him recently, in the past 4 or 5 years, because I wanted to check in on how he was doing, because I kind of felt sorry for everything that happened to him. And he came into my office and he wasn't in good shape. He was practicing. He smelled like alcohol, probably cooked some stuff on the night before or something, and it was kind of sad. So he had gone to a smaller law firm. He gotten in over his head, and so you can actually fail sometimes when that happens. It's not good. So, and then of course I talked about the perception of large law firms to smaller law firms, and the fact that the work quality will often suffer. I don't need to go into too much more detail about how that works, but because I think I've covered it pretty well. But when you're at a work with a smaller law firm, you're often not trained as well to be as good of an attorney. Now, I'm at this point putting the blame law firms for you not doing as good a work as you possibly could. And if I was an attorney working in a small law firm, what I would do and what would make you a much better attorney is I would throw myself into legal matter. I would research things and find as much case law as possible in different cases. I would make myself the best attorney I could be. I wouldn't stop. I would go immerse myself in my practice area, write papers for journals. I would try to give talks. I would try to become the absolute best attorney I could, despite being in a smaller law firm. So if you are strong enough, meaning you have the motivation, a small law firm isn't going to hold you back. You can watch what large law firms do and imitate them in terms of their work quality. You can become more versed in your practice area than people at large law firms. There's all sorts of things you can do. So you don't need to blame the law firm. You should, even if you're at a small law firm, you just need to become the best attorney you can be. So this is another big thing. Attorneys from large law firms will often go to smaller law firms because they believe they will get better hours and that will give them more time for their family. And this lifestyle trade-off will be something that's worth it. The clients of large law firms, smaller law firms are often much less demanding. And so because they can't afford to have as much work done, you may not have as much work as the clients aren't going to pay for it. So this may result in lower hours and billable hour requirements. Some small law firms, many of them, they'll have very low billable hour demands. They may say your target is 1,500 because honestly, that's hard for them to meet with the work that they have. What you need to understand if you're ever trying to move to a smaller law firm for work-life balance is that all law firms are businesses. And most law firms, if you were running a law firm, you would be interested in making money. And so many times, even people that start law firms are starting them because they want to keep more of their fees and they want to make more money. But smaller law firms will bring you in and they will promise many times you can have much lower hours. But if they have the opportunity to make more money by doing more work for clients that they can get done, then in more hours, they will do it. Meaning they may say you can work fewer hours, but if they get a lot of work coming in all of a sudden, they're going to expect you to do all that work. And because they're businesses, so maybe when they hire you, they don't have a lot of work and they say 1,500 hours. But once you get there, all of a sudden you find yourself billing over 2,000 hours. It's very common. It's something I see all the time. People are like, oh, I gave up, I took this huge salary cut and gave all this up to go to work for a smaller law firm. And yet I'm working just as many hours as I was at the large law firm. And so this happens all the time with candidates. And I see this probably couple times a month with people I'm talking to. So you can't expect to control your hours at most smaller law firms. There are practice areas where that you can, which are things like a risk, trust in estates for the most part, and other exceptions. Even trust in estates, you can't always control your hours. These are the exceptions, not the rule. And I don't think it's a few times a week. I would say it's maybe once every 2 weeks that I speak with attorneys. But if you want lower hours, it's often not a good reason to go to a larger law firm, a smaller law firm. And if you do that, then larger law firms are going to be less likely to hire you. People go to smaller law firms all the time with the expectation of fewer hours. I see it a lot, especially with women that have children and need to have a certain amount of time at home. And in some cases, and probably literally, I would say it's a pretty high percentage. I would say probably 40 or 50% of the time, the law firm will actually honor a certain number of hours with respect for the fact that the woman has to take care of children and stuff at home. But I don't really see it, and I'm not trying to be sexist here. I don't really see it as much with men. I don't know why that is. There's certainly all sorts of things going on in society. And that's one of them, but it's just, it's kind of what it is. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how to transition back to a large law firm or how to transition into a large law firm if you're at a smaller law firm, because this is the goal of so many attorneys. So many attorneys at firms that I speak to, if they're smaller, mid-sized law firms, they really are motivated to go to work in a larger law firm, especially if they've never worked there. They're motivated financially, but they're also motivated by having a big law firm name on their resume. It's a sign of honor, something that they want to have. And I don't object to that. I think it can be good. I help attorneys all the time transition from smaller law firms to larger law firms. It's not something that is impossible to do. As a matter of fact, it's if you do the right things, it can happen. I place attorneys doing this, numerous ones each year. So again, it's not that difficult. I'm going to talk to you about how to do this. This actually also, if your career started a small law firm, you're a small law firm. If you're even another practice setting, sometimes it can work, but mostly when you're coming from a small law firm. So you may actually be very enthusiastic about working in a large law firm. You may be a junior attorney and you want to work in a large law firm, or a mid-level attorney. You may be a senior attorney with 7+ years of experience and want to do it. You may be a law student and want to do it. So until you kind of the formula for transitioning back into a large law firm. So there are some smaller law firms that are extremely highly regarded. They are boutiques, and they're composed of people that have worked in large law firms and have very good reputation in the legal community to start, despite being at a small law firm. And if you go to a really, really good small law firm, sometimes those firms, these boutiques, will actually have very major clients and attorneys with top credentials working there. And they're doing very, very important work. And there are firms like this in every city. There's tons of them in Los Angeles. They're in Chicago. There's even a firm in Minnesota that's got all these Yale law graduates in it. It's small, but these types of firms are rare. But they actually do exist in every decent sized market. There's a lot of them. And if you can find a law firm where the work and the attorneys in it are highly respected, and you can move, if you're currently at that firm, you move to a large, or you move down to that firm, or you move up to that firm, it's not as difficult to transition from there to a major law firm. So, it used to be that when you wanted to find out what was going on with law firms in a given market, you would look it up. This is how old I am. You would look it up in Martindale Hubble, which was they had these printed volumes, and law firms would buy all the states and they would put them in their law library. And it was so funny. This one law firm I was at that no longer is in existence, called Dewey Valentine. I was working there, and they had a carpeted library, but there were so many people that were going to look at these books. There was you could see like a trail, like in the carpet. It was very, very funny. But when I would look at all the firms in a given city that paid to be in there, you would always see like a lot of these boutiques that had these attorneys from major law firms and incredible bios of schools and things. And so there are a lot of these firms, and oftentimes they're newer law firms that are broken off from larger law firms. But there's just all different types of these law firms, and they're often very well known. They're very well respected. They often pay very close to, if not what large law firms in the same market pay. And sometimes these firms even merge into larger law firms. It's very, very common. I remember placing 2 or 3 attorneys that were essentially from smaller law firms into this very good small law firm in Silicon Valley a long time ago. And that law firm suddenly, after those attorneys being there a year, merged into DLA Piper. I don't remember what the firm was, but all of a sudden these attorneys at a small law firm were part of a major law firm. So if you want to move into a major law firm, often getting into these firms, they're quite often absorbed into large law firms. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that often happens because the people that own the small law firm don't like all the management things that go along with it. So they end up merging into those law firms. But if I was you, I would go and investigate whatever market you're in, whatever practice area you're in, and see if you can find some of these law firms, because sometimes, not always, their hiring standards may not be as high, but they are very, very good law firms. And so I'm not saying that all small law firms are bad. There's a lot of exceptional boutiques that are awesome, meaning the attorneys are good, the clients are good. So that's one way you can move from a small law firm to a large law firm. So you may start out at a firm that's not as prestigious, and then you find one of those law firms and move to it, and you're at just as a firm that's just as respected as a large law firm in most cases. And you can often, as I told you earlier, if you're able to develop a book of business at a smaller law firm and grow it and get clients that are willing to pay high hourly rates, then you can often move to a large law firm. I have a candidate that I'm working with right now He has well, now it's a lot more, but he has had a $700,000 book of business from clients that he had met from pickleball or something. And he developed a $700,000 book of business. He's not at a large law firm, but his clients are paying a decent amount. And one Friday, he was sitting there, just Friday afternoon, getting ready to leave the office. And he got this call from this client that was recommended to him by someone that he had, one of his existing clients. And the client called up and said, we're currently using this giant law firm. I don't know what the firm was. I think it might have been Mayer Brown or something. And we're currently using this giant law firm, but we want to hire a different law firm. And he said, well, how much are they charging? What are they paying per hour? And we told him, and he said, okay. And he sent them a proposal, a litigation budget of a few $1,000,000 with the same hourly rates as this Mayer Brown was charging. And the client was like, okay, no problem. And they signed this agreement for him to represent them. So all of a sudden, he went from having a $700,000 book of business to close to a $3 million book of business. Once that happened, his search was just kind of floundering. Might have gotten like one interview through us. The 700,000 book business wasn't the lead practice area, so it was kind of helping not hurting too much. So he had other attorneys do it, but all of a sudden he went from that to getting interviews with like 4 or 5 major law firms very, very quickly because he developed that book of business. So he was able to move from a smaller law firm to a larger law firm. And the advantage of having larger clients like that is that they're willing to write big checks for ongoing work, and your amount of business can be more stable, and you're going to be able to much easily transition to a large law firm if you have that business. And that should be anybody that wants to move to a small law firm. If you don't feel like it's going to be possible for you, it is always possible when you learn to generate business. Now, I'm not talking to you today about how to generate business, but what I will say to you is that if you really want to do this, you'll figure out a way to do it. You'll read about it, you'll study it, you'll read how other people did it, you'll watch other people that did it, you'll ask questions, you will set aside time to try to find opportunities, you will do all these things, and you will develop a book of business. It's just what happens. I'll never forget, and I may have told the story in other webinars, but I know this attorney. I didn't place him or anything like that, but he started off at a smaller law firm, and very smart guy. He went to University of Chicago Law School, and I don't know why he was at a small law firm. He was a kind of a small, mid-sized law firm. But early in his career, he realized how important it was to get business. And so he's like, okay, I will build 2,000 hours a year at my firm to do well, to be successful. But in addition to that, I'm going to also spend 2,000 hours a year trying to generate business. And so as an associate, he hired a driver for very little money to drive his car around for like $15, $20 an hour, and would go and spend those 2,000 hours meeting with law firms in order to generate, not meeting with law firms, meeting with clients in order to generate business. And fast forward like 10 years, and he suddenly had this good sized book of business, like $15 million. And then he transitioned to a major law firm, like LA office of a New York law firm. And within a few years, he had a $30 million book of business. And so he went to another firm from there, and his guaranteed compensation, meaning they would pay him this no matter what he billed or whatever. They gave him like a contract for like 4 years, almost like a sports person. But they guaranteed him $7.5 million a year. So you can, out of this percentage of his business, but you can do very, very well if you want to generate business. And that's one reason I'm so bullish on law firms, is people that choose that as a career, you have that potential to make that kind of money and to have that kind of business. Once you have clients, you're essentially operating your own business, and the law firm's providing support. So I really think it's important. If you want to work in an AmLaw 200 law firm in a major city, you're going to need a good sized book of business. You could say 2 million will do it, but it's the better the firm, the more they're going to expect. So even 5 million, if you're at a smaller law firm, not the highest caliber of law firm, and you have 2 million, probably going to want a little bit more, but it kind of depends. It's going to have to be a decent amount of money. And the reason that law firms value business so much is it means that they don't have to give you work. The only thing that they have to do is provide you with support, which means they'll hire associates for you and secretaries and an office. And so for them, it's like a no-brainer. If you have $5 million book of business, they can justify paying you $1.5 million a year because they can make money off that business. And it has to be historical business, meaning it has to be business that you've had for some time. So law firms, this is just to help you think about this in the back of your head. When a law firm is looking at hiring you, they're not just interested. You can't just say, I build this much money in 2027 or whatever the year is. I build this money in build this amount, collected this amount for my clients in 2027, 2028, and 2029. So they want to see this historical business in most cases. And so it depends on the size market you're in. So the smaller the market you're in, the less business you'll need. It's just kind of how it's always worked. So if you want to work at a decent sized firm like Detroit, it may be 750, it may be over 1 million, but you can often get jobs there with that level of business. And also sometimes branch offices are easier. If you're from large law firms, a little bit easier to get in. Then, it just kind of depends. But, there are openings for senior attorneys often without business, but it's rare. But if you are a hot commodity, meaning you have a growing book of business in your practice area, law firms are going to be very hungry for you. And they just, for young attorneys, and your odds are going to improve in the future. I was working with an attorney in Colorado not too long ago, and he had, 3 years ago, he had a $500,000 book of business. Then 2 years ago, he got it up to like 700. And then in the third year, it was like 900,000. And he had so many offers from firms. He was working with a firm with like maybe 10 attorneys, and he was getting offers at firms that had, 100, 150 plus attorneys in them that were, am law firms, kind of bottom of the am law 200, but he was an up and coming attorney. Everyone was excited about him. And this is if you are a young attorney and you are generating business, and then the amount of business is improving over time, law firms love that because it shows that you're hungry, that you have potential, that clients like you, all sorts of stuff. The other way you can move into a large law firm is your practice area. So in the practice area you're in, if there are not a lot of people doing it, you can often move into a much larger law firm than you would possibly potentially be able to move into another practice area. So it says here patent prosecution. Patent prosecution is kind of a classic one because what happens to patent prosecutors, if you don't know anything about patent prosecution, essentially in order to be a patent prosecutor, you need to have gone to school and gotten some sort of technical, like a degree in physics or a degree in biology or a degree in mathematics or computer science or electrical engineering. So you need to have that in order to take the patent bar. And then once you take the patent bar, you're a patent attorney. But what happens to most patent attorneys is they get out of school, they become engineers, then they typically don't get the best grades in their undergrad because they're taking these very difficult electrical engineering type classes, curves and stuff, as opposed to taking history classes or whatever. So they take all these, they typically don't get the best grades, they don't get into the best law schools. And then the same thing happens law school. They often don't get the best grades. Maybe they're still working sometimes as an engineer or whatever, but they don't get the best grades. And so when they come out, they get jobs in small law firms. But once they've had it because the grades aren't good enough to get jobs in large law firms, and their schools aren't good enough. But then what happens is after working in a small law firm for a few years, suddenly they're marketable because there's not a lot of people with that type of experience in whatever market they're in. And so it's much easier to move to a large law firm. You have other practice areas like tax, trust and estates, ERISA, not data privacy really anymore. Some types of environmental work, bankruptcy, risk, like practice areas where there's not a lot of attorneys in your market doing that type of work are very common to very easy often to move into a larger law firm. I had a candidate that I'm working with that I worked with actually this week. Trust and estates right now, by the way, is probably the hottest practice area out there. If I was a young attorney and was looking to transition to a large law firm or get into a very stable practice area that you can have your own practice doing, that you can make money in the long term doing, even if you're on your own. Trust and estates is a great practice area. So I was working with an attorney where was she? I think she was in Chicago, and just this week. And she was a trust and estates attorney, well credentialed, good law schools and everything, but working in a smaller law firm. And there are lots of trust and estates openings in Chicago. So, and at large law firms. So she's getting a lot of interest because There's not a lot of other trust and estates attorneys at large law firms for them to choose for. It's a very active practice area. Also, if you're in when corporate gets very, very active and the economy is kind of doing really, really well, then attorneys are able to transition often from small law firms to large law firms. Very common when that practice area heats up. So you may come out of law school and the only firm you're able to get a job in is a small law firm doing corporate work, or you may transition from a large law firm to a small law firm and doing corporate work. But when the market gets very, very active, there's just kind of a feeding frenzy. Everybody wants attorneys to do corporate, and there's not enough people in the market doing it, and you can often get jobs. And the same thing goes for niche practice areas. Sometimes healthcare is another one of them. Not a lot of people doing healthcare in the market. So that's a very active practice area right now. So large law firms are now hiring people from small law firms to do that. So I talked about patent law earlier and how that works, and the experience you get on risk. Yeah, executive compensation is another one. Food and drug law is another one. There's not a lot of food and drug law attorneys out there. You probably never even that one. So that practice area can be easy to transition into. So it's just important to keep in mind if you're a large law firm attorney transitioning to a small law firm, or you are at a small law firm, to move into a position into a practice area where that there's not a lot of attorneys like you, can be can give you a better chance moving to a top practice area than a good practice from a small law firm to a large law firm. I'll just give you one quick example of that. About 3 years ago, I had a woman that was working for a healthcare attorney in Dallas, Texas. And this healthcare attorney had worked in a major law firm for 7 or 8 years doing healthcare law. He'd gone to University of Chicago Law School, great law school, and then had set up this healthcare boutique. But it was just her and this other attorney. She, more than anything, wanted to move to a large law firm. And so I started working for her, and she did get interviews with large law firms in Dallas when they had openings. So any law firm in Dallas that had an opening for a healthcare attorney, major law firms like Baker and Botts and stuff, she got interviews with. So it can be, you can definitely get positions in large law firms if you're coming from some very well-respected, very niche practice areas. And so if there's not a lot of people like you in that market, you can do very well. I had another, I just keep telling these stories, but I had another woman that was a trademark attorney in Seattle with a very small firm of maybe 2 or 3 attorneys. And I did this kind of thing where I put together a list of all of these attorneys that were interested in different markets, in different practice areas. And I had put it together and I sent it out to firms across the country. I didn't send them ID. I just basically said, I've got this trademark attorney in the market and this healthcare attorney would be interested and so forth. And she ended up getting an interview with them and getting a job with like 100 plus attorney law firm in Michigan, in Detroit, and which they don't have a lot of trademark attorneys in Detroit. So that was kind of cool that she was able to make that transition. So the other thing that helps you in transitioning to getting a job in a large law firm is if you develop a very strong reputation in the legal community, working in smaller law firms. So you can be very, very good at something. You can become very well known. You can commit to something. When I was at Quinn Emanuel, there was an attorney who was in the office right next to me, and he'd been working in like this 20 attorney law firm. And then he did a trial against a partner from Quinn Emanuel. And the partner from Quinn Emanuel just couldn't believe what a good attorney he was. And at the end of the trial, was like, you have to come to work for us. And so you can, if you do very, very well and develop a very good reputation in the legal community, then large law firms will often be interested in you. And I really encourage everyone to do whatever you can to develop a good reputation in the legal community, to be known in your practice area and to become an expert and to become someone that's thought very highly of in the legal community. Because if you do that, you can do very, very well. You can, regardless of the size firm you're at, you should try to look like to the public and to other large law firm, other firms, like just an exceptional person. And, just an example of attorney that moved from a large law firm. I've seen partners. I saw a partner from a large law firm. He was up against a major law firm in New York in a transaction, and they couldn't believe, the large law firm, how hard this guy worked on the transaction and how much detail he did, and how he solved problems and got spotted issues and things that the large law firm wasn't doing. And the large law firm at the end, I mean, they were like, wow, they were just talking among themselves about how hard he worked and what an incredible job he did in the transaction and how he was even better than their own attorneys. And so they hired him at their firm. And what was remarkable about it is he was like a 15th year attorney. So normally a large law firm wouldn't hire someone with 15 years of experience without a significant book of business. But this guy was like so good that they were like, we need him. So you can definitely develop a good reputation in your practice area, press other attorneys, write articles, be known, give talks, all these sorts of things that build up your reputation and make you someone that looks very, very strong to the legal community. I remember it used to be called Hogan Hearts, and now it's Hogan Bells. But there was an attorney that I was working with, not I was working with, that I interviewed with when they opened an office in Los Angeles a few decades ago. And he had been a very, very well regarded solo practitioner in healthcare law and with clients that were fairly significant. I don't know how he did it, but he'd been doing it for the past 20 years of his career. And they saw him, and he ended up being one of the people that opened their office in Los Angeles at Quinn Emanuel. This is very interesting. There was a Quinn Emanuel used to be called Quinn Emanuel. So it was Quinn, this guy named Emanuel, Urquhart, they were the named partners. And then they wanted, because they were in Los Angeles, they wanted to get this reputation of also being kind of an entertainment law firm. So they hired this guy named George Hedges, who's no longer alive. They hired George Hedges to be a named partner. He was a very well-regarded entertainment attorney with his own firm. Meaning his own firm is just him. He'd never worked at a law firm, a large law firm, but they hired him just because he had these incredible clients, like all these stars and things. And they wanted to have that association and respected him. And actually, because of the type of work he did, he wasn't generating anywhere near the level of fees that a named partner at that firm generated. His billing rates were lower, the clients didn't pay as much, but they wanted to have that association. So being well regarded in your practice area can really help you. And then I talked a little bit about smaller firms merging with large law firms already. That often happens because the small law firms don't want to do kind of all the administrative things. And it happens very, very regularly with smaller law firms. Sometimes people move with a partner that has a lot of business. They may be working at a smaller law firm that working directly for a partner with a lot of business. And those partners, if they have a lot of business at a small law firm, are often recruited by large law firms if the law firm knows who they are. So that can help you quite a bit. It's very common for people that start founders of small law firms, large law firms, taking their business back to large law firms later. So, what you need to do at all points in your career, by the way, is you need to have mentors, and a mentor will help you if the mentor is really good in the business and you get very close to them, there's a chance, of course, that they will get quartered away to large law firms, branch offices. I don't need to talk too much about that, but sometimes branch offices of law firms in smaller markets will have a difficult time, especially when they're new, and they have a difficult time attracting different types of attorneys. So there are major law firms that have offices in places like Las Vegas, Memphis, Aspen, Madison, Colorado, and so forth. And those law firms typically are easier to get into in the branch offices than they are in the main office of the law firm. So that's just something to think about. It's much easier if you want to move to a large law firm to get a position in a branch office than the main office. Not always the case, but quite often. Most of the time when those branch offices are newer branch offices and not older ones. And I talked earlier about people getting hired in economic booms. Corporate is the most typical example. I remember between 1998 and late 2000, where attorneys from the smallest law firms you can imagine were being snapped up by firms in New York and Palo Alto. I couldn't believe what was going on. I was seeing attorneys at like 5-person firms getting like 5 major law firms in the Bay Area, or people in New York that were working at smaller law firms that had gone to these law schools that typically large law firms don't even pay attention to, like Pace Law School and things, that were in corporate getting positions in this law firm. When I say I couldn't believe it, I was like Sherman and Sterling hiring someone from Pace Law School in the middle of the class from a small law firm. I mean, this is an aberration of history. It's just, it does happen. So, and then sometimes just applying to a lot of places can help you. When I work with attorneys, I will, and most people, meaning more than 50% of attorneys I work with, resist this approach. But if you apply to enough firms, you'll often get lucky. So if you apply to 20 firms, the odds of you getting lucky are very low. If you apply to 100, they're better. You need to be applying to as many possible places as you can. I mean, sometimes people will just see your resume and they'll be like, wow, this is amazing. We could use someone like this. I mean, it's rare, but it happens. I remember I applied to Stanford Business School and I got this interview there, and the woman on the admissions committee that interviewed me had grown up in Detroit and she'd gone to the same law school I did, which is eerie. And there was, I guess I had good grades and things in college and I did well in GMATs, but getting into Stanford Business School is kind of weird. It's like I'd never worked in a corporation. I'd never law firms, all these different things that normally you would need to get into Stanford Business School. I didn't pick Stanford Business School, but I don't think I got in there because I think I got in there because this person on the admissions committee had grown up in Detroit, where I'm from, and had also gone to the same law school. And what are the odds? And so sometimes things just jump out at people and you will get hired. You just never know. So oftentimes it's just timing. Sometimes the law firm, there'll be a timing issue. So you just never know. So I will just point out to everyone that you do need to apply to as many places as you can. You should never limit the number of applications. If you are unemployed, you should be applying to as many places as you possibly can. It should be a full-time job. You should not think you can log into LinkedIn and apply to a few jobs and look at it each day, or apply to firms Indeed or Law Crossing or whatever site you're using. You shouldn't think that just applying to openings is enough. You should be applying to as many firms without openings. I think it's crazy that people don't do this, because if you're representing yourself in job search, the smartest thing that you can do is apply to as many places as possible. That's how it works. You can't expect to get a position if you're not putting yourself out there as much as possible. It works. I mean, I could tell you all sorts of stories about it working for me, about working for other people. I used to have this business called Legal Authority. And essentially what the business would do is people would sign up and say they're interested. Then we would have a person talk to them, and the person would say, okay, there are 800 law firms that do the type of litigation you do in Los Angeles. We can help you apply to them. So then we would take all the 800 firms and we would write letters for them to each firm, and then we would attach them with the resume, and then we would send them a box of envelopes that were printed and letters. And I mean, people got jobs with it all the time. It grew into this giant business, and because it worked, got referrals. Right now, I have this business it's part of BCG. It's called BCG Premier. I'll also give you a link to it at some point after this presentation. But that does the same thing. It helps people apply to lots of jobs, like 30 a week, or whatever the number is, or 40 a week on their own. And you need to be getting yourself out there to get jobs if you're unemployed, or even if you're just looking for a job. You should be applying to as many places as possible. This is something that I talk about all the time, just kind of as a personal story for you. I was in a 2-year federal clerkship, and about the first year, close to the end of the first year, I did some things wrong. It wasn't anything that I'd done wrong with the quality of my work. It was just politically, the judge was very far right at the time. I certainly wasn't very far right. So he didn't like the way conclusions I was making, orders and things. I wasn't on his side. So he basically called me into his office, and it looked like to me like I was getting fired, but he hadn't said that yet. And I said, well, I'd like to, resign. Just, this is not a good fit. And he said, that's great. So you can resign. And so I resigned. And then I was in a position where I didn't know what to do. I had a position back in New York, but that was after a 2-year clerkship. So I didn't know if I could go back to them and say, hey, I'm doing a 1-year clerkship now. Doing that would have to basically be fired. So I was nervous about doing that. So I decided my best option was to send a few hundred letters to all the law firms I could find in Martindale and Los Angeles. And I didn't just send things to firms that were ranked now like the largest firms. I sent them to a few hundred firms. I mean, I don't know what it was, 300 firms. I wrote all these letters. I remember using really high quality Crane stationery and stuff, which can make a good impression. And I sent all these letters out, and then I decided I was going to, instead of going back to New York, I was going to register for the California bar. So I registered for the California bar like 3 days before the deadline, and sent out all these letters. And I was very surprised. I mean, I got like 15 interviews, and that never would have happened had I not sent out so many letters. I just never would have gotten a position. If I'd applied to just 20, 30 big firms in Los Angeles, it never would have happened. And I ended up getting a position in Quinn Emanuel, which at that time was a 40-person law firm. And who would have known how awesome it was, but it became. But that was the way I got a job. And I always remember that. I've always encouraged people to follow this advice because it works. So, if it's possible to transition it is possible to transition from a small law firm to a large law firm. You have to realize the obstacles. There are a lot of obstacles. And so that's kind of the presentation. Let's take a quick break just for like a couple of minutes. And then when we come back, I will answer everyone's questions about this. I hope that I've given you enough background about how to transition from a small law firm to a large law firm, told you some of the drawbacks, and I've given you encouragement for your career. And I would say, one thing I say to everybody that's on these webinars is every week or two, I just get these kind of cold emails from people that say, oh, I was on this one webinar and it just totally changed my approach to my career. And this is what happened to me. And so I really commend everyone that spends the time like you are today watching this presentation and learning, hopefully taking notes, because all of this information can change your career. And I only know this because I've been doing nothing but this 12 hours every weekday for 25 years. And so it's something I've learned to understand, not because I have any abilities, well, I guess I might in this space, but because I spend so much time doing it. So I hope all this stuff helped you. We'll take a couple-minute break, and then when we come back, I will take questions, and you can ask questions about whatever you like, and I will answer them. And then hopefully, I can help you. I think the best part of these webinars is the questions that people ask, because these questions can really, the answers to them can often change the direction of your career and those of others too. Okay, so I'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, I will do questions. All right, so please ask as many questions, and I'll stop sharing for a second. I hope everyone asks as many questions as possible. All right, so before I go to the questions, I did want to tell everyone a little bit about a couple of services that we offer at BCG. And these services are to help people, and they're not something necessarily that are a huge profit center or anything like that. I mean, when we place attorneys, our fees are typically like 25% of the attorney's annual salary. So someone who's placed makes 300,000, we make 75. So it's obviously a pretty decent business, and anything that tracks for it is not always the smartest thing. But we have a couple of different services that could help you in your job search. These are things that are really very, very valuable that can help you. One thing that we can do is we can, regardless of your resume, what you're doing, we know the places that you can apply. So we can know where the best firms are, the firms that are most likely to be interested in you, and that you can apply to on your own. If we can't represent you as a recruiter, I mean, these are kind of the things that a recruiter needs in order to represent you. Currently, like an associate in a law firm or a partner, you need to be in one practice area, you need to be from the US, you need to be admitted to the bar, you need to have a certain level of experience, or if you have more than that experience, you need to be in a practice area. Business, if you have business, you need to have something that typically generates 3 to 4 times what you expect as an annual salary. So that's considered profit here. That's kind of how that works. So these two services, the service that we have is, this is bcgpremier.com, but this is one service where we'll put all of the positions and firms that are likely to hire you into your account at BCG, which is very helpful. It's very, very valuable. We spent over $100 million on a resume, on our database to do that. And then the other thing that we can do for you is we can apply to firms for you. Instead of you applying, we can do 25 applications per week, with basically us doing all the work for you, applying as you to the firms. Or we can do even more firms, like 50 law firms a week. So these are good services. I'm not necessarily here to pitch them, but I'm just telling you that we do have resources that if you're not employed or you're trying to find a new position and you're not kind of in the position where you can use a recruiter, which I'll just kind of paste this actually for the Q&A section. second. But we do have these services that can help you if you don't believe, if you're trying to find a position and you may not be in a position where you should be using a recruiter. Second. So, and one thing that I don't like about what I do for a living is that most people we can't necessarily help, which kind of sucks because obviously I would love to help everyone. We make more money, all sorts of good things. But these are the kind of what you need to work with a recruiter. So we get people submitting their resume to us all day long, but most people, because of these limitations, we can't help. So you really need to be kind of in the practice area where in a situation where a recruiter can help you. And these are kind of the rules. You have to be either an associate or partner in a law firm. You have to be in a stable practice area. You have to be from the U.S. most of the time. But there are exceptions to that in some cases. Corporate attorneys coming from other countries or Canada, really well regarded, but it's very difficult. You typically need to have 1 to 6 years of experience as an associate, typically not much more. And then if you have more than that, those years of experience, you have to have portable business most of the time. Not always the case, but I'm just kind of, what do you need to work as a recruiter? And that's kind of what you need. You need to have those things. And so most people don't have that. So because you don't have that, you can definitely apply to firms on your own, or we can recommend places for you to apply for pretty incredibly reasonably monthly fee. And this is not like people are often suspicious of anyone trying to sell them something. This is just kind of a service that we offer to help people. It's nowhere near the type of revenue that we're interested in making as a company, but I offer it because my goal and the kind of the core value of our company is to get attorneys jobs, and this is one way to do it. Okay, so let me go to the questions, and please ask a lot of questions. I think question you have about your career, these questions are all anonymous. They're not something that no one's going to know who you are. No one's going to know who you are asking these questions. It's just, I think these are important it's important to ask questions regardless of what you have. And again, just to kind of go into, I charge a lot of money for the consulting. So this is actually free. So this will hopefully hopefully the answers to these questions will help you. So this person sounds named, why would a lawyer with an established small law practice want to join a large law firm except to make more money? Are there any other reasons? I ask because they must sacrifice lifestyle and so forth. Yeah, so if you're concerned about lifestyle, you don't want to join a large law firm because that's not necessarily going to be something that is going to help you. It's not going to give you that. The only reason that you would ever want to join a large law firm is because you believe you can you can get larger clients. Larger clients will ultimately mean more money, or you will get that brand. The brand of a large law firm makes it much easier to attract large clients than the brand of a smaller law firm. So most of the time, unless it's a really well-established boutique. Okay, let's see here. Thank you. And again, please ask as many questions you have. I've got all the time in the world. What are some realistic strategies for marketing myself to larger firms? My current practice area is not highly transferable. For example, I'm currently in insurance defense, but like to move into litigation at a larger law firm. How can I frame my skills in a way that shows my potential to excel in a completely different area of law? Okay, so this person asked a very good question. And this question, the answer to it will help people that are currently in insurance defense firms. It will also help young attorneys that are considering going into insurance defense. So the problem with insurance defense is that typically in insurance defense, the typical insurance defense attorney is representing insurance companies that are being sued by someone that was in some sort of accident, meaning they were sued for an auto accident, and the insurance defense attorney needs to help them with whatever happened. And so then they would have to, then they would move into something like commercial litigation in order to try to get a better experience. But the problem with insurance defense is that if you're representing someone that's been in an auto accident, which is typically the type of case, it could be a slip and fall, it could be whatever, there's all sorts of things. But the insurance companies don't expect you to do very high quality work. They're trying to get the lowest billable hour rate. And most of the time, they just need someone to kind of push the case along until the case settles, which 98% of all auto accidents and everything ultimately do. So if you want to move into commercial litigation, like what do you do? How can you frame your skills in a way to excel in a completely different area of law? So that transition to commercial litigation is difficult. So the reason it's difficult is because you can imagine the quality of work that's required in an auto accident versus the quality of work that's required in commercial litigation. So, what is commercial litigation? Commercial litigation is representing companies that are involved in litigation, whether or not they're whatever the type of litigation. But if you're representing companies, companies have higher budgets, they expect more insight into issues. And so it's a different type of work. Insurance defense is not as, I mean, I'm not trying to be rude, but the quality of work expected is nowhere near what's expected for the average commercial litigation person. So what does that mean? It means that, I mean, just put yourself in the position of someone doing the insurance company. How complex is the work representing someone in an auto accident as opposed for an insurance company, as opposed to someone doing work representing a large company that's fighting some significant matter. So how do you frame your skills in a way that shows your way to excel in a completely different area of law? What I recommend to most insurance defense attorneys is you can either find a smaller law firm to hire you that does commercial litigation and learn from that small law firm, or that does it, and there are small law firms that do it, or you can go into a different branch of insurance defense. So one of the most common ones is like a person may be doing insurance defense, but they may want to try to move to a different firm doing something like a very common one is product liability. So product liability is more complex type of work. You can also often in insurance defense do something called insurance coverage. You can move into that, which is considered a much more respectable practice area. But if you find yourself in insurance defense, it's often very difficult to get out of it. It does have, at least compared to larger firms, commercial litigation, it has a little bit of a stigma attached to it, which again, I'm not trying to be rude. You can certainly become a very successful insurance defense attorney and build a good insurance defense firm, but it's more difficult to do that because of quality of work that's done at insurance defense firms. And I think one thing I've emphasized throughout this webinar is you want to put yourself in a situation where you're trying to do as good of work as you can for the larger clients as you can in order to have consistent, to get the most experience and to be the best attorney. So insurance defense often makes it. What are some of the biggest red flags that larger law firms look for when evaluating candidates coming from smaller law firms? I've heard that larger law firms are hesitant to hire attorneys from smaller firms due to concerns about adjusting to more hierarchical or structured environments. How can I proactively address these concerns in interviews on my resume? Are there specific points I should be highlighting while discussing? I don't know that large law firms are not interested in people because of hierarchical issues. I think they're most often not interested because of the perceived quality of work. And then they do like to hire other people from brand name firms. So that's kind of the main thing in terms of red flags. There are some things that will help you throughout your career. For example, moving into a large law firm is often much easier if you have really good educational qualifications and start a smaller law firm, meaning you went to a top law school. But most larger law firms, when they're evaluating your practice area and how good you look at it, and then that's really their main concern. And then other things, like I said, like your law school will often be looked at. So what do you highlight on your resume? You just highlight the fact you have really, really good experience in your practice area. I do resume reviews. Give me 1 second here. I don't even know if I have it open. I don't have that open, but I do resume reviews for people in any way. But those are kind of the main things. And one of the things that I was starting this webinar this morning, typically someone else would pick up the topic for me to work on. And I didn't like this as much because this topic seems, when you look at it, registry for it seems like it's only about for large law firms, people from large law firms, but it's really not. How can I position my experience from a smaller law firm as an asset when applying to smaller firms, or where this law firm procedures is valuable? What are some ways I can emphasize the skills I gain, especially in my cases where my cases and clients were not as high profile at larger firms? Should I focus on the breadth of responsibilities I handled, or is there a specific angle I should take? Okay, well, one of the things that, I don't know if this will help you, this answer to this question, but one of the things that large law firms like to see is they like it when people are very, very eager and enthusiastic, when they have like 4 or 5 years of experience, when they're incredibly enthusiastic about working in a larger law firm and moving up. They like that because they know that person will work hard. They know that person will commit to the firm because it would be very difficult for them to get another job like that. So people that get jobs in really good firms from smaller law firms, when they do get in the door, they're often so enthusiastic compared to other attorneys that may be kind of beaten down or tired or not as enthusiastic for large law firms. They're often much more enthusiastic. That's just one thing, but focusing on the breadth of your responsibilities and if there's an angle you should take, most of the time in order to make your resume as good as possible, you just need to show a lot of stability in your practice area and then focus on that and basically make yourself look very strong. A lot of people think that the responsibilities they had working on different matters are important. I guess you could say they are, but when you're in a large law firm, often you're so focused on one aspect of a practice area, not always in commercial litigation, for example, that having, saying you've done trials as a fifth-year attorney is not something that is going to be as valuable for a large law firm where in order to do trials, you might have been a partner for years. I mean, it's not as valuable. But when I look at resumes of attorneys, I look at having like a lot of stability in your practice area, looking very enthusiastic about a practice area, and then all that experience kind of leading to that person looking like that's what they want to do. That's what they've always wanted to do. So what does that mean? So like, for example, if you have a healthcare attorney and the healthcare attorney went to college and maybe they majored in something related to nursing. Then they became a nurse. And then they went to law school. And then when they were in law school, they were in the Health Law Society and all this sort of stuff. And then they go to work in a small law firm as a healthcare attorney. Well, everything in their experiences and in their life has been directed towards being a healthcare attorney. Like all their jobs, all their degrees, their associations, everything has been about that. So large law firms like that. In contrast, what a lot of people do, and I don't know why they do it, most people don't know how to put together a resume. And again, I do consulting for resumes. I'm sorry that I'm not a better salesman and don't have a link to my resume services. But a lot of people make so many mistakes on the resume. So a mistake would be you would go to college and then you would come out of college. And then when you come out of college, you don't have any experience. And I mean, you take a job in like, I don't know, corporate, something related to corporate. Hold on one second. I apologize. My apologies. I was muted. But when you, in order to make your experience look as strong as you possibly can, your resume needs to look like that's all you've ever wanted to do, and that's what you're about. So a lot of times people will have these resumes that will have nothing to do with their practice area. They will have gone to college and they will have been on all these associations have nothing to do with their practice area. And they will go to law school and be able to take all these jobs that have out of college have nothing to do with their practice area. And then they will go to law school and they'll have all these associations and things that have nothing to do with their practice area. I mean, they'll list highest grade and some class that's not even related to the practice area in the resume. So people look at your resume, what they need to see is they need to see your practice area. I mean, your experience looks all about your practice area. And that is really kind of the most important thing. Your experience needs to look like it's 100% about your practice area. Your resume needs to look focused on your practice area. You need to remove things that have nothing to do with your practice area. I mean, sometimes people have these long resumes, like they'll have one job where they were a litigator, and their next job is they're a corporate attorney, and they will list all their litigation responsibilities. I mean, if you are a switch practice area, you just say you're an associate in the firm. That's all you need to say. You don't want to talk about your practice area if it's not the one you're in. So everything in your resume needs to look like you're about your practice area. That's how people get hired. They don't get hired when there's a lot of things on their resume that have nothing to do with their practice area. They think they need to list everything they've done and all the associations and all the experience they have doing other things. Your experience in your resume, the only way you're going to get hired is if it looks all about your practice area. Okay, good. So people are asking more questions. I appreciate it. Okay, I've been at a smaller law firm and haven't been involved in significant business development. How much will this hurt my chances of moving to a larger firm? I understand the larger firms often value attorneys with strong books of business. While I've contributed to my firm's growth, I haven't had to actively bring in clients. What can I do now to start building relationships that can benefit my transition to a larger firm, or is it something that's expected before I apply? I haven't been involved in significant business development. Sorry, I was thinking about this. Okay, so the requirement for business doesn't really come in until you're more senior. So during your first 5 years of practice, you're really kind of expected to just develop an expertise in a practice area, like you're getting training in something. I can't emphasize enough how important your first 5 years of practice are. And what that means is you're going to a law firm and It's incredible. I mean, it's the best deal of the century. It's not now what happens when you're a doctor. You're going to a law firm and you're getting paid to, when I say a doctor, doctors that are in residencies and stuff don't make a lot of money. But when you're in a law firm, you're getting paid in your first 5 years essentially to be trained in a practice area. And it takes about 5 years for most practice areas to be properly trained. So you're getting experience in a given practice area. So that's actually very, very good. And because you're getting trained in that practice area, that's going to help you start, that's going to make you a good attorney. Now, when you get beyond 5 or 6 years, law firms, if as you get more senior, are going to want you to have business because the business it's how they justify hiring more senior attorneys. And the reason for that is because in a law firm, when you're a big law firm, I mean, at 6 or 7 years, either you're competing for partnership or you're going to leave. And so if you're not going to make it anyway, but what happens when you become a more senior attorney is it's more difficult for firms to give you work because your billing rates become closer to what a partner is. And because they're closer to what a partner is, the clients typically prefer the partner to do the work as opposed to the associate. And not only that, the partners make more money when they do their work on their own. So a partner that does their own work might get 40% of what they bill. And if they give it to someone else, they're going to get 10%. So there's no incentive in most firms to give senior attorneys work or senior associates work for a long period of time, unless the law firm believes that they will make money from them or they have such a great skill that it's so difficult to find in the market. So if you're a smaller law firm and you want to move to a larger law firm, one of the ways for the large law firm to justify hiring you when you get more senior is having some sort of heavy business. I mean, because they're not going to hire you at with a high seniority level, and it's just not in their best interest because of all the things I said. So you need to try to develop business, and business, like I said earlier, should be a high priority for you. It's very sad that most attorneys go to work for law firms and they think about their billable hours and everything, but they don't think about spending a significant amount of time developing business. And you should really do whatever you can to do that early in your career, if at all possible, and just start building those relationships and trying to get work. I mean, how do you get work? I mean, you do it in all sorts of ways. I mean, if you're a litigator, there's sheets that come out each day of who's been sued, and then you call those companies and you try to get them to work, to hire you. I mean, there's just all sorts of ways that you can get business. But my point to you is you'll figure it out. You need to figure it out. It's just like, how do you find a significant other? I mean, you have to figure it out. I mean, I guess not as much now that there's dating apps, but you need to figure this stuff out. You need to do it on your own, and no one's going to help you. The firm's not going to help you because they want you to do work when you're a young attorney and bill hours. So you need to help yourself. And helping yourself may not mean going to work at a larger law firm, but when you get business, but you need to start helping yourself and you need to get business. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get business. Getting business is extremely important because when you get business, you're going to be self-sufficient. I mean, when you have those clients, you can move anywhere. You're going to always have work to do, and you're going to stay employed and safe in the law firm. So that's going to help you quite a bit if you want to get a position. Okay, the next question is, how can you determine whether a smaller law firm has a positive reputation in the market? So that's not too difficult. When you look at a smaller law firm, you look at the attorneys there. So if they have really good qualifications, meaning they went to great law schools, maybe worked at great firms, that's going to show you. But the main thing is you'll also look at their clients and and if they're large clients, that's going to show you that they have a good reputation. And then maybe they'll talk about the matters they've done. I mean, you can usually figure it out I can figure it out in about 30 seconds by looking at a law firm. So typically it's the clients and the caliber of attorneys that are there. So the very best boutiques will have the very best people with the best schools and the best experience, and you'll basically be able to see it right away in the largest clients. So when you see small law firms with large clients and good attorneys in them, that's a sign that they probably have a very good reputation. Okay, so this person says, woman, let's see here. Hoping you can expand on applying to niche practice areas. I'm interested in healthcare transactional practice area. Okay, so any type of niche practice area experience you get is going to, or practice area you go into, is always going to be a very good thing. I'm going to show you some niche practice areas. So if you are in these niche practice areas, these are things that will help you get positioned throughout your career. So I'm going to kind of go over some of those right now. Make sure this is the right one for this. Nope, I don't. Well, maybe I am. Let's see. Okay. So these are some practice areas in the BCG database. So you may be asking yourself, what is a good practice area to go into if I want to move to a larger law firm, or what is a good practice area to go into if I want to have a niche experience that's going to be very helpful for me throughout my career. So one example here would be alcohol and beverage law. Now, large law firms don't necessarily do that, but they did. It's a very good niche practice area. Sometimes there's small law firms that do antitrust, typically they're plaintiffs firms. That would be a niche practice area. Art and museum law is a niche practice area. Bankruptcy is kind of a niche practice area, but it's typically, there's a lot of boutiques that do it, and they do it on behalf of larger companies. But if you're in a firm like that does work for creditors and Chapter 11 and Chapter 13, that can be good. Cannabis law was like a popular practice area a few years ago. It's not really anything right now. Construction law is a very good niche practice area. If you go into construction law, and you commit to it, you will have a very good career. So construction is a good practice area. Now, most large law firms don't do that, but that is a practice area where you can have, I think, a lot of employment stability. There's not a lot of construction law attorneys, but the ones that there are typically are always employable. It's just a very good practice area. Corporate's kind of interesting. These are kind of niche things in corporate, but this corporate is not, I would not call it a niche practice area. Criminal law, you're not going to get jobs in large law firms doing that, but in some cases you can with white collar. That's not as good of a practice area. But data privacy was a popular practice area several years ago when there was data breaches and everything, and then people wanted to get these data privacy certifications. That it was kind of a very niche, popular practice area for a short period of time, but it's not. Education is a great practice area. If I was a law student and thinking about a practice area to go into, this is a great practice area. There's a lot of opportunity and there's always work in it. I mean, just think about everywhere you are, there's schools and universities. And so this is a very good practice area. A lot of people don't go into it. Energy, oil, and gas, I would call a niche practice area. It's very, very difficult because things kind of go up and down in it. There are attorneys that do this as a niche practice area and very successful, but I consider it a practice area that's difficult just because energy policy is always changing. And sometimes it's busy, sometimes it's not. I see that as a risky niche practice area. Entertainment is a niche practice area, but it's very difficult to get jobs in larger firms doing it. The work can often also be sporadic, meaning you may do a contract for an entertainment company, but then or an entertainer, but then you have to get a new one. So the work can often be difficult. Now in Los Angeles, there are people that do transactional entertainment law, and that is a very niche practice area, meaning you're putting together deals for companies or for motion pictures and things. And that actually could be a pretty good practice area, but it's very niche. Environmental is, I would call it sort of a niche practice area, and it is. The water law is a good practice area. Mining law is good practice. Land use and zoning are good practice areas. And land use, by the way, is a very good niche practice area in environmental law, because land use just means like, what can you do with a piece of land? How can it be zoned? And so developers will pay a lot of money for that. And I think that is a good practice area. General environmental law is a little different. Land use is good. ERISA, absolutely a great practice area. The general risk executive compensation is an awesome practice area. You can get jobs doing, if you're a smaller law firm, you become an expert in executive compensation. That's a good practice area to move into larger law firms with. So I think ERISA is awesome if you can get experience with that. Family law, you cannot move into larger firms doing 99% of the time. I mean, there are a few firms, Buchanan, Ingersoll and stuff, that have those as practice areas. Sometimes it happens, but I think if I was an attorney and I was just starting out, I think family law is an outstanding practice to get into, because there's so much money and people are always getting divorced. Most type of finance, I don't know that I would call it as much of a niche practice area, but there are parts of it, like transportation finance can be good, some aspects of it, but I consider it more of not a niche practice area. And I think that one of the dangers of it is that project finance is kind of the domain of large law firms, and most of these practice areas are not niche enough, and they're hard to have stability in. Food and drug law, franchise law, both great niche practice areas, and you can move into larger law firms doing food and drug law, whereas franchise law is a little bit more difficult, but those are very good practice areas. What are these government ones? Yeah, most of this government stuff you're never going to move to a larger practice area with, except for government contracts. Government contracts is a very good niche practice area. That's one I would recommend. And I'm going into a lot of detail with everyone because I'm trying to show you how to make career decisions and where you're going to be marketable, where you're going to get business. This person that asked this question was talking about healthcare transactional work, which would be compliance, transaction, HIPAA. That's a very good practice area to be in. I think that at this point in time, there's even a lot of openings for senior attorneys doing that type of work. So healthcare transactional work is a good practice area to be in. I think you can have a lot of career stability doing that. It's a very good niche practice area. Most of these healthcare litigation jobs are not. Plaintiffs, healthcare, and defense are not good practice areas. They're not niche enough. I mean, if you want to do like medical malpractice litigation, you can certainly find jobs doing that. It's a good practice area, but it doesn't pay a lot. But healthcare compliance is a great practice area. Immigration is a niche practice area, but you're almost never going to get into a large law firm doing that. And it's a very competitive practice area because there's a lot of people who do it. Insurance defense is not a niche practice area, but insurance coverage is regulatory work. So people that get into insurance coverage, that's a very good practice area to be in. And you can often get quite a few jobs doing that. And you can have a lot of career stability. Intellectual property, the main one here is going to be patenting, any type of patent prosecution. You can get into large law firms doing that. There's not a lot of patent prosecutors out there in the general attorney population, so it's a good practice area to be in. Typically, you'll have people that do hard sciences patent or life sciences. If you're a patent attorney, you probably know everything about there is to know about that. Trademark and copyright is a very dangerous practice area because the work tends to be, not always, but it tends to be not as demanding as in terms of the type of work and the insight and stuff needed to provide a lot of career stability. But yeah, it's a dangerous practice area. It can do well in good climates, but it's very difficult unless you have your own practice. It's a difficult position in practice area. Employment law is a good practice area. Employment defense, you can often, and I don't call it niche, but you can often do well throughout your career. Employer defense, labor law is good. You can do the same thing with that. And then compliance and counseling, that's a very good practice area to get into. Doing plaintiff's employment law, a little bit different. So, and that's much more difficult. Litigation, so executive compensation, I mean, again, it's kind of the same thing here. Appellate is a very difficult practice area. Construction, I already talked about. Insurance coverage, litigation, that's good. Yeah, most of this type of litigation, unless you know what it is, you do it. But most of this type of litigation is not necessarily that niche. But if you do get experience in something like trust in the states litigation and want to go to a larger law firm, that's often not too difficult. Maritime to niche. Municipal law is an awesome practice area to be in, especially transactions and land use. There's municipalities all over, so that can be good. It can also get you into larger law firms. That's a practice law that I recommend. Native American law, nonprofit, others, those are not going to get you into a large law firm. Real estate, finance, leasing, general, purchase and sale. I would call real estate not a niche practice area, but I would say that if you're doing anything related to leasing or commercial transactions and you're a smaller law firm, you do have the ability to move to a larger law firm with that experience. So there are a lot of small law firms that do commercial transactions and leasing and stuff, and purchase and sale, and you can develop business in that practice area. You can work in a larger law firm if you get enough experience doing that. So that's actually a very good practice area from moving to a larger law firm. Tax, I'm not going to talk too much about that, but large law firms typically want to hire tax attorneys that are coming from other large law firms. That means not necessarily accounting firms. It means just, they want typically people that are coming from larger law firms. There's some exceptions, like state and local tax can be good, but tax is a very difficult practice area. And that's an okay practice area. It used to be very good 20 years ago. Telecommunications, there are a lot of boutiques that do that. Sometimes you can move into a larger law firm. I talked about trust in the states already. There are large law firms that do that, but it's a very good niche practice area to be into because you can always get trust in the states work no matter where you are in compensation. So, that's a lot of detail. I went into that just because I wanted to kind of show everyone where the opportunities are, the most important niche practice areas. In answer to the person's question about healthcare transactions, yes, that's a very good practice area to be in, and something that you can transition to a larger. Here's another good question. Thank you for asking it. This person asks, how can I transition from M&A in a large law firm to trust in the states law other than by moving into a smaller law firm? Okay, so if you want to transition into M&A from a large law firm to trust in the states law, yes, you need to move probably into a smaller law firm. I think that if I was in a large law firm and I wasn't confident in my future during M&A, I would really recommend to you, I think it's a great decision to try to go into trust and estates law. I think there's just so many benefits to it. I'll tell you a funny story. There's a landlord I know in Malibu. She's friends with my fiance. She owns this building, which is like the old courthouse in Malibu. And she was showing me some office space. And there was a really nice office space that had been like the old courtroom. And there was an attorney in it that was paying a lot of money per month. And she said, this guy is incredible. He only graduated from law school like 3.5 years ago. And he just started his own firm doing trust and estates law. And he just bought a $5 million house. So obviously, he's doing well. I don't know what kind of down payment you put in a $5 million house, probably at least $1 million, and then have a good income to support it. So in order to transition into a large law firm, from a large law firm to trust and estates, even if you started your own practice, it can be a very good practice area to get into because it's one of these things where there's so much work. And if you're polished enough to get a job in an M&A in a large law firm, you're going to probably be very, very successful doing trust and estates law. You have to figure out how to do business, but with trust and estates law, there's all sorts of places and groups and things online that can help you and train you to get into that. So I think that's a really good decision. I've seen so many people have so much success. This next question. If you're an experienced lawyer in a small law firm with a large client base, what are your chances of re-entering big law? They're actually very good, but your clients would have to be paying similar hourly rates to you as they would pay in a large law firm. Or be willing to do that if you transition. So that's, if you're a small law firm and you have enough clients and they're paying enough money, you can always transition back. All right. Well, thank you everyone for all your questions. This webinar, I kind of felt a little bad because it looked like it's only geared towards attorneys and large law firms. So I did try to make it a little more geared towards people from all sorts of backgrounds and tell you a little bit about that. But I think everyone, I hope if you took notes and everything today, I hope you learned a lot. I think this was a great topic and I appreciate everyone being here. And we'll talk next week. The topic I have next week will be geared towards all attorneys as opposed to looking like it was geared just towards large attorneys. But I do appreciate everyone being here. Thank you and have a great rest of your week.